I recently read The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, and then I watched the 2005 movie War of the Worlds directed by Steven Spielberg. We'll compare the two, see how they're different, how they are the same, and see which one I liked better. By the way, we might get into some minor spoilers, so if you haven't read the book or seen the movie, go watch the book. Go watch the book. Go read the book and go watch the movie and then come back and watch this video. Okay, first the book, The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. It was published in 1898 and is actually one of the first stories ever published, as far as I know, that details a conflict between mankind and an alien species. I want to start off with mentioning the first few lines of this book because they are amazing. It starts off with, "No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. Intellects vast and cool and unsympathetic regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us." Some creepy stuff. It tells the tale of a Martian invasion of London and the surrounding areas in the late 1800s or early 1900s. I did not love this book. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And that might be because the way it's written as a kind of historical account of this Martian invasion. It's written from the perspective of the main character, who you do not learn a lot about. You know that he's a writer of philosophical themes, it says in the book, and then he's got a wife. Other than that, you don't even learn his name. It never mentions his name throughout the entire book. But anyway, he writes it in such a way that it's not very dramatic. It's more of just a very factual account of what he sees and hears. And it can be scary at times, but for a book about an alien invasion of Earth, I actually found myself a little bored at times. The book is divided into two parts. The first part is the coming of the Martians, and the second part is Earth under the Martians. And I actually liked the second half a little bit better. The first part was interesting. It talks about how there are these explosions seen from the surface of Mars, and these large cylinders land in this area near London. And then the Martians appear and they start building these machines, these tripod machines, and start killing people with these heat rays, which sounds exciting. And it just wasn't as exciting as I think it could have been if it had been written a little differently. To me, one of the most interesting parts of this book was to see how slowly the news traveled back then. Again, this book came out in the late 1800s, so when you think of an alien invasion of Earth, if that happened today, how quickly the news would travel. You'd see cell phone video of aliens on the news, but back then they didn't have cell phones, so it was interesting to read about aliens killing a bunch of people, and then, you know, in a town maybe just 30 to an hour away, they had no idea that this was even going on. Okay, let's talk about the movie now. War of the Worlds, they got rid of the, a 2005 movie by Steven Spielberg and starring Tom Cruise, Dakota Fanning, Justin Chatwin, and Tim Robbins. I did not love this movie either, but like the book, I did like it. There's a lot of fun to be had with this movie, but it does have some flaws, which I'll get into. So this movie is nothing like the book. And normally I would fault it for that, but because it's so different, you can tell that they're trying to do their own thing with this story, that it's a little easier to just kind of check yourself away from the book and just judge it on its own. Morgan Freeman. The movie follows the character Ray Ferrier, played by Tom Cruise, and he is kind of a deadbeat dad, dock worker who's divorced. His ex-wife drops off their two kids, played by Dakota Fanning and Justin Chatwin, to his house. Anyway, you can tell right away that Ray doesn't have the best relationship with his ex-wife or his kids, and I liked this part of the movie because this is a much more interesting, more fleshed out main character than the one from the book. This movie has some great moments and some not so great moments. Great moment number one is when the first Martian first appears and starts killing people with its heat ray. However, right before all that starts happening, this thing comes out of the ground and a bunch of people are crowding around, and there's some cartoonish characters like a couple of cops and some neighborhood people that Tom Cruise's character runs into. They just seem like cartoons to me. And anyway, as these people are crowding around, watching the earth underneath them crack and it's like an earthquake is going on, they didn't seem to behave like normal people would behave. I watched this movie with my wife who had never seen it, and she told me, okay, these people are way too calm for this situation, and I kind of agreed. Then there's a really awesome sequence where Tom Cruise and his kids get in a van and drive away, and meanwhile all this explosions and destruction is happening behind them. That was a lot of fun to watch. Now, in my opinion, the best scene in this movie is when the main characters come across a crowd of people and they're driving through them very slowly in this van. Now, at this point, they're the only people for miles that have a working car. And this crowd of people knows that and they want this car. Things quickly turn really ugly. Some people die. Their mob mentality kind of comes into effect, and I think that it was gritty and really tense and realistic. I think that if something like this actually happened in real life, you would see an ugly scene like this, because when people are desperate, they can do some pretty horrific things. I really like the way the tripods in the movie looked. They're big and menacing, and the sound that these aliens emit from the tripods, this deep bass noise, is really unsettling and frightening. A couple things about this movie that I didn't love are Tim Robbins' character. He comes into the movie about 2/3 of the way through, and he puts on this really, in my opinion, really forced New Jersey accent that was just kind of distracting.
I don't think we're on the same page.
Another thing that I didn't like is the ending of this movie. It is really abrupt, and that's something that it's been widely criticized for, and I'll just leave it at that. Okay, so which one did I like better, the book or the movie? Well, this one was tough, because like I said, I did not love either, but I did like both of them. And so because of that, I will have to say that I liked both equally. I hope that doesn't seem like a cop-out. I did really rack my brain and think long and hard about it, but it's the truth. I have mad respect for H.G. Wells and the original plot that he came up with. It's an amazingly cool premise. I just didn't love the execution. Like I said, it was really dry, and you don't really know that much about the main character, so you don't care that much about the main character.